And inflation is back in double digits. It rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% in August. Now, despite continuing falls in the costs of petrol, the Office for National Statistics, tricky word, said that the rise was driven by further increases to the price of food, which saw its largest annual rise in over 40 years.
Well, in response, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt promised the government will prioritise help for the most vulnerable, while Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said, quote, "This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street and paid for by working people." Well, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan is with us right now. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. So inflation is increasing. What does this mean for ordinary people?
Well, it means that, according to the ONS, the cost of living, the average basket of goods and services that we use, is 10.1% higher in September 2022 than it was in September 2021. That's a very big number. It's 5 times the Bank of England's 2% inflation target. But I think a lot of people will feel that in reality, the actual increase in the cost of living is much, much higher, particularly if you're spending lots of your income on food and fuel, like petrol, heating, and so on. Within the numbers, we've got the highest food and drink inflation, that's non-alcoholic drinks, since 1980. That's up at 14.5%, so that's higher than the average rate of inflation. And it all points to a cost of living crisis. We can talk about all this data, but real people and real companies are feeling the squeeze. You know, if you're trying to make ends meet, running a household, a busy family, or if you're running a small business, a restaurant or a laundrette or something like that, the cost of everything is going up. And it's hard to grow when prices are going up so quickly.
I wonder, are we making too much of the psychological element of back in double figures? The rise from August to September was 0.2%. Now, obviously, it's quite a high level, but it's margin of error stuff, really. This is potentially inflation staying where it was. A bad thing, but are we putting too much emphasis on this double-digit, single-digit dichotomy?
You're right. 9.9 to 10.1, 2.2 percentage points, as you say, a fifth of 1%. It's not a big deal. But what's a really big deal is that it's still high and 5 times the target. And you know, it's very hard to measure these things specifically. And I've often said, you know, the ONS in general, it does a good job. It's one of the best statistical agencies in the world. But it's quite hard to calibrate that basket of goods and services that they do each year to reflect an incredibly diverse population in terms of how we spend our money. I think it's worth stressing, too, before PMQs, and I know you'll be watching that closely, both of you, as we all will in the newsroom, a really key moment in British politics. It's not just political pantomime. This is, you know, is the Prime Minister going to survive, frankly? If I was Keir Starmer, I would be putting the Prime Minister under huge pressure about this inflation number, because this is a September inflation number. And September inflation numbers are what are traditionally the number that we use, the benchmark we use to uprate benefits the following spring. So in April, at the beginning of what we call the next fiscal year, April to April. And if we're not going to uprate the basic state pension by 10.1%, which will cost tens of billions of pounds, then the government's breaking a manifesto commitment. It's so-called triple lock. And since I last came on the show, Tom, I've been doing some sums.
Yes.
And if you look at that triple lock, you get an increase in the pension by basic state pension by either 2.5% or the increase in average earnings or the increase in the consumer price index, inflation, whichever is higher.
Yeah.
And if they don't do the CPI, the 10.1, then maybe they'll do average earnings, right? And
Which
if
is what, 5%?
About 5.4%, including bonuses. If they do that, then that will mean the basic state pension recipient gets about £450 less per year
than they otherwise would
than
have
if
done.
the triple lock was actually honoured, if you like. And if you're a pensioner and you're paying through the nose for energy and food, and there is a lot of people talk about the battle of the generations. Young people have a hard time and the baby boomers have got all their houses. There is still a lot of pensioner poverty in this country.
Yeah.
Indeed.
There will be people across the country,
perhaps asset rich but cash poor.
potentially, and some of them just poor. Can't put their heating on. There will be ghastly, tragic fatalities because of high energy bills. And the optics, the political optics of not honouring that triple lock, however expensive it will be very, very difficult. And I'd suspect Labour soon will say, actually, we will honour the triple lock, because the political points to be scored are higher than the potential political downside of looking fiscally irresponsible.
Potentially that is something that will be happening at noon today, noticing Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, wouldn't commit to that this morning. Perhaps Sir Keir is saving it up for midday.
Potentially.
But Liam, I know you'll be watching that closely, as we all will, and as everyone at home can too, by staying with us on GB News. Noon today, the big flashpoint there.
I think Liam made a very strong point that this isn't necessarily an intergenerational conflict. Undoubtedly, there are a lot of challenges that young people have, but many of the older generations are suffering from this cost of living crisis too.